Why would a woman who once dragged two wounded soldiers out of the fire, a medic who saved lives at the edge of death, be publicly humiliated, branded a coward by her own commanding officer? The dawn mist clung low to the training field at Fort Ironvale. Soldiers stood in formation, their breath hanging in the cold air. At the front, Colonel Steele's lips curled into a smirk. His eyes locked on one figure in the back row, a woman who stood straighter than most men in that line, even as she clutched her shoulder with quiet pain. Captain Beth Carver, 34 years old, broad-shouldered, lean, with eyes the color of stormy skies. She carried herself like someone who had lived through more than drills and lectures, like someone who had stared death in the face and refused to step aside. Yet this morning, her strength seemed invisible to those around her. Whispers rippled through the ranks. "She'll never make it. She's broken. She's here because they pity her." Beth ignored them, her face calm, her breathing steady. But under her jacket, her left shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat, her hand pressed against the brace hidden beneath the fabric. She knew what Steele thought of her. He had never said it out loud until today. He barked his orders, his voice sharp against the silence, and then he laughed, mocking, dismissive. That laugh cut deeper than the cold morning air, louder than the murmurs of her peers. To him, Beth Carver wasn't a soldier. She was an excuse. The formation stiffened, eyes turning toward her. The air felt heavy, expectant. Beth inhaled slowly, fingers brushing the zipper of her PT jacket. For a moment, she closed her eyes, saw the flames of another dawn, heard the explosion that had shattered her body but not her will. And when she opened them again, she chose not to hide. The zipper slid down, the sound sharp against the hush. The mist swirled. The fabric fell open. And beneath it, the scars emerged, lines carved by fire and steel, living proof of sacrifice. And in that instant, silence consumed the base. No one dared breathe. Captain Beth Carver was a soldier who rarely raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her discipline spoke louder than any words. At Fort Ironvale, you could almost set your watch by her routine sunrise jog to the infirmary boots. Polished medical bag, checked twice, every vial and bandage lined with precision. She was steady, calm, unshaken. A quiet guardian in a world that valued noise. Yet in the silence of her presence, whispers grew. Soldiers just old enough to remember Iraq or Afghanistan only from their textbooks leaned close to one another in the mess hall or barracks. She gets special treatment because she's a woman. That shoulder thing, just her excuse to skip real training. Their voices never rose above a murmur, but Beth heard them all the same. She didn't flinch, didn't answer. She had learned long ago that silence was stronger than arguments. In the medical station, she focused on what she could control. She checked vitals, logged injuries, patched sprains, listened to coughs that were probably more nerves than illness. When a young private tore his ankle during an obstacle course, Beth was the one who lifted him, half carried, half dragged across the yard to the exam cot. She worked with methodical care, murmuring reassurance that steadied the boy more than the ice pack in her hand. But when he thanked her, she only nodded, her face unreadable. He didn't know that carrying weight with her left arm sent a hot streak of pain down her shoulder every single time. At night in the small room she kept off the infirmary wing, Beth opened a wooden box. Inside were the letters she never mailed. Each one began the same: Dad, I'm fine. She told him about the weather, about the chow line, about the stray dog that sometimes wandered onto the field. She never told him about the phantom pain that made her fingers tremble when she gripped a pen, or about the ache that woke her at 3 a.m. as if shrapnel were still lodged beneath her skin. She wanted her father, an old mechanic from Ohio, to sleep peacefully, not to lie awake fearing for a daughter who carried scars he had never seen. The soldiers around her saw a woman who avoided PT drills. They never saw the medals in her footlocker or the surgical plates buried under her skin. They never saw the nights she sat with the wounded, long after everyone else clocked out, whispering encouragement through morphine haze. They saw quiet. They mistook it for weakness. And Beth endured it as she endured everything, head high, jaw set, eyes forward. But the Army has a way of testing even the strongest silence. And the word coward that Colonel Steele was about to hurl at her in front of the entire formation would rip her world apart, forcing her to choose between retreating into shadows or finally revealing the truth she had buried beneath that jacket. The notice came before sunrise. A combat rescue drill was scheduled for the weekend, simulating mass casualties at the fuel depot. Every unit on base would contribute personnel, and the medical detachment would be at the center of it. Beth Carver received the order with a nod, her face calm as ever. Rescue operations were her calling. Bleeding hands, burned skin, broken bones, she had seen them all before. The drill itself wasn't the problem. It was what came attached. Colonel Steele stood before the assembled formation with his hands behind his back, boots planted like steel rods. His voice carried across the mist, "Every soldier will complete the combat fitness test. No exceptions. No excuses." Murmurs rippled through the ranks. Everyone knew what that meant. There were always exceptions, profiles for soldiers recovering from injury medical modifications, for those who had earned them in blood. The Army had regulations for a reason, but Steele's jaw was set, his eyes daring anyone to challenge him. Beth felt the familiar ache spike through her left shoulder, as if her bones themselves were recoiling at the announcement. She took a measured step forward. "Sir, I have a permanent profile for my shoulder. My physicians authorize modified lanes." Steele cut her off, his voice sharp as a whip. "Excuses." The word snapped in the air. Several soldiers shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Steele's gaze bore into Beth like a challenge. "You wear this uniform like everyone else. You'll be tested like everyone else." Beth's lips pressed together, the muscles in her jaw tightening. She wanted to explain about the plates and screws, about the pain that never left, about the nights she woke gasping from dreams where explosions still rang in her ears. But she had already learned that explanations didn't matter to men like Steele. To him, words were weakness. Profiles were loopholes. Scars were invisible unless they could be counted in reps or miles. The formation broke. Soldiers stretched, dropped into warm-ups. Some avoided looking at her. Others smirked quietly, confirming their whispers. "See, told you, she hides behind that injury." Beth stood at the edge, her chest tight with anger and shame. For a moment, the thought pressed against her like a weight she could walk away. File for reassignment. Go back to hospital duty, avoid this spectacle. She imagined mailing one of those letters to her father, "At last, Dad, I've transferred. It's easier this way." She could quit right then. But just as the thought settled, a voice from the past returned. The memory of her mother's hands, gentle but firm, slipping a stethoscope into her palm before deploying to a field hospital. The faint etching carved into the metal E73. A reminder of compassion, a reminder of duty. And now, decades later, that same stethoscope sat inside a package waiting for Beth in Doc Harlan's office. She exhaled slowly, the word excuses still burning in her ears. Her shoulder throbbed. Her pride ached worse. But she knew this wasn't over. Not yet. She could quit right then, file for reassignment. But a package from her past changed everything. Beth's boots pressed into the dirt of the training field, but her mind drifted miles and years away to a desert road scorched by fire. The blast had come without warning. One moment she was checking pulses in the back of the convoy. The next she was airborne, thrown against armored steel, as if she were weightless. The sound of the IED was not a sound at all. It was a roar that swallowed the world. When she opened her eyes, the air was smoke and blood, and her left side refused to move. Pinned beneath twisted metal, she had tasted sand and iron at once. Around her, cries cut through the haze, a sergeant clutching his stomach, a private screaming for his mother. Beth remembered trying to crawl toward them, but her shoulder felt as if knives had been driven into the bone. Still, she forced her hands forward, dragging herself inch by inch. She saved 2 men that night, her own body torn apart in the process. And for what? In the months that followed, she lay in sterile hospital rooms, staring at the ceiling as surgeons screwed plates into her shoulder, sewing her back together like patchwork. Pain became a constant companion. More than once she had considered signing those papers: resignation, early medical discharge. She had stared at the blank line for her signature, pen trembling in her right hand. But each time she saw her mother's face, a military nurse who had stitched together broken soldiers long before Beth ever put on a uniform. She remembered the words her mother repeated like prayer: "Strength isn't about looking unbreakable. It's about standing back up when you've already been broken." Now, standing on the edge of the PT field, Colonel Steele's laughter still echoing in her ears, Beth felt the weight of 2 choices. She could retreat, spare herself more humiliation, vanish into the quiet world of paperwork and hospital wards, or she could stay, endure the sneers, risk failing in front of every soldier on base. Her scar burned beneath the jacket, as if reminding her it was not only a wound but a story. a story she had never told out loud. Beth's chest rose and fell. Her silence was her shield. But inside the struggle raged like fire to retreat and disappear, or to stand and prove once again that broken does not mean defeated. The infirmary smelled faintly of antiseptic and old leather, the kind of scent that clings to bandages and boots long after the war has ended. Doc Harlan sat behind his desk shoulders, hunched spectacles low on his nose. His hair had thinned to a silver fringe, his face lined with decades of service, but his eyes remained steady, the eyes of a man who had patched more soldiers back together than most commanders had ever led into battle. When Beth stepped through the doorway, he didn't look surprised. It was as if he had been waiting for her all morning. He gestured for her to sit, but she stayed standing, her posture rigid. The silence hung between them until Harlan finally reached into a drawer and slid a small battered parcel across the desk. Beth stared at it. Her name was written in her mother's careful script. The ink slightly faded. The paper creased as if it had traveled a long road before finally arriving here. Her breath caught in her throat. With hands that trembled more than she wanted to admit, she tore the paper open. Inside lay a stethoscope, old but polished, the tubing worn soft with years of use. On the metal chest piece, etched deep into the steel, were 3 characters, E73. Beneath it lay a single page, her mother's handwriting looping across the paper. Beth, you don't have to prove anything except your humanity. Strength is not the absence of pain. It's the choice to keep serving even when pain insists you stop. Beth's vision blurred. For years, she had carried her scars like a secret, half ashamed, half defiant. Now in her hands was proof that her mother had always known this path would test her beyond flesh and bone. Doc Harlan's voice broke the silence. Your mother gave this to me before she passed. Said you'd need it when the army tried to measure you by the wrong yardstick. He leaned forward, folding his hands together. Discipline isn't punishment, Captain. It isn't about proving toughness for the sake of pride. It's about building the kind of endurance that lets you serve longer so you can save the next soldier who stumbles. That's what matters. Beth swallowed hard, her throat tight. The word steel had spat at her. Excuses still burned like acid in her ears. But here was another voice, softer yet stronger, cutting through the noise. Harlan tapped the stethoscope with one finger. This isn't just a tool. It's a reminder. Soldiers don't follow scars or medals. They follow the ones who keep showing up day after day, even when it hurts. Beth closed her fingers around the cool steel, the engraved letters pressing into her palm like a seal. E73. Her mother's voice, her mentor's wisdom, her own quiet resolve, they braided together inside her chest. For the first time since the colonel's laugh had echoed across the training field, she felt the flame steady within her. She would not run. She would not hide. Beth decided to enter the trial knowing full well the pain could tear her apart. The morning of the test arrived crisp and cold. Fog still clung to the grass as soldiers lined the PT field, stamping their boots to chase the chill. Beth sat alone on the edge of the bleachers, winding the black brace around her shoulder. The Velcro rasped in the quiet, a sound that felt louder than the chatter of dozens of soldiers around her. She pulled the strap tight until the pain steadied into something she could control. The brace was her shield, not against the weight she would carry, but against the disbelief she knew she would face. Colonel Steele strode across the field, his presence heavy as iron. Combat fitness test begins in 5. All lanes full standard. No modifications. His eyes flicked toward Beth, lingering a second too long. He wanted everyone to hear it. Beth inhaled through her nose, lifted her hand, and spoke. Sir, I have a permanent medical profile. Request placement on the modified lane as authorized. The colonel didn't even pause. His voice cracked like thunder. Request denied. You'll do the same as everyone else, or you'll step off this field. A ripple moved through the formation. Some soldiers shifted uneasily. Others smirked, already writing the ending in their minds. Beth lowered her hand. The brace bit into her shoulder, a reminder of what was broken, but also of what had been rebuilt. She bowed her head, lips moving silently. Her mother's words were still there, etched deeper than any scar. Hold the line, then lift the fallen. When she raised her eyes again, they were steady gray blue like stone beneath storm. She took her place at the starting line. The gravel crunched beneath her boots. Around her, young men and women stretched in flexed bodies, unscarred shoulders rolling without hesitation. They glanced at her with the same doubt she had carried for years, The same suspicion whispered in mess halls and locker rooms. Beth didn't answer their looks. She centered herself. One breath in, one breath out. The whistle blew. Soldiers dropped to the ground for the first event push-ups. Beth lowered herself slowly, her brace straining her shoulders, screaming. She completed one, then another, precise, deliberate. Each rep was a bargain with pain. Each rep was a vow to herself. Colonel Steele's shadow loomed nearby. He didn't shout, not yet. He watched, waiting for her to falter. Beth pushed again, face tightening, sweat already sliding along her jawline. Her lips moved once more, not in protest, but in a whisper no one else could hear. Hold the line. And with that, she crossed the threshold, not into just another test, but into the crucible where she would either prove her worth or be shattered in front of them all. The whistle cut the morning air. Dozens of bodies dropped to the ground, arms pumping in rhythm. Gravel crunched beneath their palms. Sweat already began to shine under the pale sun. Beth lowered herself slowly, every movement measured. She drew in air through her nose, held for 4 beats, let it out for 7. Paused, then pulled in again, the 4, 7, 8 breathing her physical therapist had drilled into her. It steadied her, gave her muscles a rhythm when her shoulder wanted to collapse. One rep, then another. Each push-up precise, her back straight, her core tight. Not many, but perfect. Colonel Steele's voice cracked through the formation like a whip. Is that all you've got, Carver? My recruits can do more on their first day. Heads turned. A few privates snickered, others looked down, embarrassed. Beth kept her eyes fixed on the ground, her lips moving silently. Hold the line. By the time the whistle blew again, she had barely broken double digits. It didn't matter. She had finished without cheating, without collapsing flat. She pushed herself to her knees, breathing sharp but steady. The next station waited the sandbag carry. Soldiers heaved the 70-pound sacks over their shoulders, sprinting down and back. Beth tightened her brace and bent low muscles, trembling as the weight settled against her wounded side. Step by step, she moved forward. Not fast, not smooth, but steady. Some soldiers passed her, laughing under their breath. One muttered, "Grandma's moving faster than that." Another chuckled loud enough for Steele to hear. The colonel smirked. If you can't carry the weight, Carver, maybe you don't belong here. Beth's jaw clenched. She didn't rise to the bait. Each step was agony, her shoulder burning, her breath short. But she carried the bag all the way, to the line, turned and carried it back. When she dropped it, her arms quivered, but she stayed upright. And that's when a quiet voice slipped through the noise. Cadence. 1, 2, 3, 4. Beth glanced sideways. Sergeant June Morales, short, stocky, tough as steel cables, was pacing nearby, not officially assigned to her lane, but close enough to lend rhythm. Her voice was low, almost hidden beneath the wind, but steady. Beth nodded once, just enough for Morales to know she'd heard. An ally. Not loud, not showy, but present. Then came the ammo can lift. Beth managed a few clean races, shoulder trembling, the metal box shaking in her grip. Steele barked again. What is this, Carver? A tea party lift, like a soldier. And from the corner of her eye, Beth caught a glint. A phone angled low. Sergeant Pike. He stood behind the line, pretending to tie his boot, but his screen reflected sunlight. Recording, not her. Him. Recording Steele's every insult. Beth pressed harder. She didn't want this spectacle archived, but she couldn't stop him. The final event loomed, the rescue sled drag. A weighted sled with a dummy strapped down, meant to simulate hauling a wounded comrade to safety. Soldiers ahead of her grunted, straining the sleds, scraping and screeching across the asphalt. Beth gripped the straps. The leather dug into her palms. She leaned back, muscles quaking, pulling with everything she had. The sled lurched, then screeched forward. The sound tore her open. Instantly, she was back on that desert road. The shriek of metal against pavement became the scream of armored doors twisted by the blast. Smoke filled her lungs. She saw Private Langston, pinned, blood pooling, his hand clawing at the air. She heard Sergeant Miller crying out for help, his voice breaking. Her knees buckled. For a heartbeat, she froze, eyes wide, chest heaving. Not again. Not here. The colonel's voice pierced her trance. Coward, you can't even drag a dummy. How do you expect to drag a man? The word ripped through her like shrapnel all over again. Her grip faltered. The sled clanged back against the asphalt. But Morales' voice came again, firmer this time. One step. Just one. "You've done worse, Carver." Beth blinked, sweat stinging her eyes. She saw Morales' steady gaze, the faint nod that said, "You're not alone." She clenched the straps again. Every nerve in her shoulder screamed. She leaned back. The sled shifted. Another step, then another. Soldiers along the line turned, their chatter dying down. No one laughed now. Beth dragged the sled all the way to the finish line. When she dropped the straps, her chest heaved like a drum. Her vision blurred, but she was still standing. And in the silence that followed, the screech of metal still echoed in her mind. A sound that wasn't just steel on asphalt, it was the sound of the past clawing back into the present. When Beth reached the rescue sled drag, the screech of metal against asphalt triggered a nightmare flashback. The sled dragged behind her like an anchor, shrieking across the asphalt. With every inch she forced it forward. Beth's boots dug deep, her brace straining her lungs, pulling air in ragged bursts. The straps burned against her palms. She leaned back with everything she had left, and her body betrayed her. Her knees buckled. The weight snapped the sled back, slamming it against the ground with a thunderous clang. Beth crashed forward, hands scraping gravel, sweat, and dust mixing into a bitter taste on her tongue. The formation went still. Soldiers froze mid-rep, mid-step, watching. A few gasped softly, others looked away uncomfortable at the sight of a decorated captain crumpled in the dirt. Colonel Steele's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Coward?" The word rang across the field, sharper than the sled's screech, harsher than the pain ripping through her shoulder. Coward. A word she had never heard aimed at her. Not on that desert road when she crawled through smoke to reach her wounded. Not in the operating room when surgeons warned she might never lift her arm again. Not once, not until now. Humiliation surged hot in her chest. Rage burned just beneath it. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her, some filled with pity, others with judgment, all of them waiting to see if she would stay down. Her breath came in shallow bursts. Her scar throbbed, each pulse a reminder of the night the convoy exploded. For a moment she almost stayed there, her palms pressed into the dirt, her pride crushed beneath Steele's word. Then her fingers brushed against something on her wrist, the braided paracord bracelet, frayed but strong, woven years ago by her mother's hands. She remembered the night it was given to her, her mother whispering, "This cord is stronger than it looks. So are you. Hold it and you'll remember who you are." Beth clenched the bracelet until the cords bit into her skin. The pain sharpened her focus. The rage steadied into resolve. Slowly she planted one boot against the ground. Gravel shifted beneath her heel, then the other. She pushed legs, trembling shoulders, shaking until she stood again. The sled straps hung limp, but she was upright. The formation murmured voices, low, uncertain. Morales, standing nearby, nodded once, her lips tightening into the faintest hint of a smile. Not pity, respect. Beth's chest rose and fell, her breasts ragged but deliberate. She lifted her chin, eyes locking with Steele's across the field. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The act of rising said everything. The word coward still hung in the air, but it no longer belonged to her. Beth gripped the straps again. Her body screamed in protest, but her will answered louder. And step by step, inch by inch, she dragged the weight forward once more. She was not broken. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her quit. Beth's hands trembled as she released the sled straps. Her chest heaved, lungs, raw body screaming for rest. But she didn't crumble. She stood still, back straight, eyes fixed on the man who had just branded her with a word no soldier should ever hear: coward. The weight of silence pressed down on the training field. Soldiers shuffled uneasily, their earlier smirks gone, replaced by a quiet tension. Morales' steady gaze burned encouragement from across the lane. Steel, arms folded, stood like a judge who believed he'd already issued the final verdict. Beth reached for the zipper of her PT jacket. The sound was small, but in that silence, it echoed like a shot. Zip by zip, the barrier peeled away. She slid the sleeves from her arms and dropped the jacket to the ground. Gasps broke the quiet. Across her back, ink and scar tissue told a story more eloquent than any words. A tattoo stretched wide, the silhouette of an eagle, wings unfurled in flight. But the ink was fractured by scars, jagged lines, raised tissue burn marks that carved across her shoulder and ribs. The eagle's wings embraced wounds that no surgeon could fully erase. The formation froze. Soldiers who had whispered against her now stared in the stunned silence. their eyes locked on the proof of sacrifice carved into her skin. Beth's voice was calm, steady, carrying across the field without needing to shout. Afghanistan. Our convoy hit an IED. The blast threw me against the vehicle, tore through my shoulder, filled me with shrapnel. She turned slightly, tracing the long scar down her ribs with her hand. Here they pulled metal from beside my heart. Here they rebuilt the bone they said would never hold again. These smaller marks, dozens of fragments they dug from my back and arms. Her words weren't bitter. They weren't meant for pity. They were facts delivered with the quiet strength of someone who had already survived the worst. Steele's jaw tightened. For the first time, his eyes wavered, shifting away. Beth continued. I saved 2 men that night, Sergeant Miller, Private Langston. I dragged them out before the fire took them, before the blood loss won. I stayed conscious long enough to treat their wounds. When the evac birds arrived, I was still holding pressure on Miller's chest with one hand, while pieces of shrapnel were still inside my own. She looked around at the soldiers, their faces pale and wide-eyed. I don't say this for glory. I don't wear these scars for excuses. I wear them because they remind me why we serve to stand when others fall. To hold the line, then lift the fallen. Morales stepped forward, her voice cutting through the stunned air. It's true, I was there. Carver did everything she just said. She's the reason 2 soldiers lived to see home. A murmur spread through the formation, low at first, then rising. Soldiers nodded, some whispering to each other, others bowing their heads in quiet respect. Beth's eyes returned to Steele. The colonel, so quick to sneer, now faltered. His lips parted, but no words came. For the first time since he'd taken command, he looked smaller, diminished under the weight of truth. Beth lowered her shirt back into place, covering the scars, but not the memory seared into every witness present. She bent to pick up her jacket movements, deliberate, her breathing controlled. The silence was no longer Steele's weapon, it was hers. When she rose again, she spoke not in anger, but in clarity. Sir, I have never asked for pity, never once asked for less than my duty. What I ask for and what every soldier here deserves is respect for the cost paid in service. The formation stood motionless. Even the wind seemed to hold back as if waiting. Steele's face had gone pale. He shifted his stance, hands twitching as if searching for authority he no longer held. His mouth opened to speak, but Morales' voice cut in, again louder this time, addressing the entire unit. She is no coward. She is the bravest among us, and every one of you knows it. A wave of agreement rippled across the soldiers. Heads nodded. A few voices rose, affirmations, acknowledgments of Beth's service. Some spoke names, recalling rumors they had heard of her actions overseas. Stories that had seemed distant now stood before them, undeniable. Steele swallowed hard, his authority crumbling with every passing second. He had called her weak, called her a fraud, but now he stood before living proof of courage that eclipsed his judgment. Beth folded her jacket neatly over her arm, her dignity intact, her presence commanding more respect than rank could ever grant. And just when the soldiers thought the moment had reached its end, a klaxon blared from the far side of the base. Alarms wailed, red lights flashing across the depot. Smoke curled into the sky. A voice shouted over the loudspeaker, fire in the fuel storage personnel trapped inside. The formation snapped to attention, confusion spreading. Steele barked for order, but his voice faltered, uncertain. Beth's eyes narrowed, her body tensing despite the pain. But the truth didn't end there. Something unexpected was about to shake the entire base. The sirens wailed like a cry of warning across Fort Ironvale. From beyond the PT field, black smoke curled into the pale morning sky. The words from the loudspeaker stabbed through the air, fire in the fuel storage personnel trapped inside. For a moment, chaos rippled through the formation. Soldiers shifted uncertainly, waiting for direction. Colonel Steele opened his mouth, but no orders came. His eyes darted toward the smoke, then back at the line of soldiers. For all his iron discipline, he hesitated, paralyzed. Beth stepped forward. Her voice cut clean through the confusion. Morales, Pike, you're with me. Everyone else secure the perimeter and keep clear of the firebreak. The tone left no space for doubt. Morales snapped to motion, instantly jogging to Beth's side. Pike hesitated, glancing at Steele. But Steele's silence was answer enough. With a grim nod, Pike followed. They raced toward the depot, the heat growing with every stride. The air grew thick, tinged with the acrid bite of burning fuel. Beth's shoulder screamed, but she pushed forward, focusing on the drills she had lived and taught. At the entrance, smoke boiled out in violent gusts. Flames licked the rafters inside. Somewhere in that inferno, a technician was trapped. Beth pulled a coil of paracord from her belt, looping one end around the doorframe. Line stays fixed here. We follow it out, no exceptions. She turned to the others. 2 and 2 out. Morales, you're on my flank. Pike, you cover the rear. Steele's command may be frozen, but we'll run this by the book. Pike's eyes narrowed. He wasn't used to taking orders from her, but the roar of fire and the weight of the moment stripped away pride. He clipped his glove around the cord and nodded. Beth toggled her radio. Channel 1 inside team. Channel 2 outside relay. Keep chatter clear. With that, they plunged into the smoke. Inside, the world narrowed to heat and sound. Flames cracked along steel drums. Shadows warped against the walls. The air was suffocating, every breath filtered through cloth and grit. Beth crouched low, one hand on the cord, the other sweeping with a flashlight. Over here, Morales' shouted, voice muffled. On the ground lay the technician, slumped unmoving, half covered by fallen debris. His chest rose, faintly alive but fading fast. Beth dropped beside him, pressing 2 fingers to his neck. A weak pulse throbbed under soot-stained skin. She forced herself into action. Morales cleared the debris. Pike, give me cover watch for flare-ups above. They worked as one. Morales hauled away chunks of metal while Pike aimed his flashlight at the beams threatening to collapse. Sparks rained down, sizzling against the concrete. Beth hooked her arm under the technician's shoulder, bracing with her good arm. Her injured side screamed in agony, but she refused to let go. Got him, she gasped. Back to the cord. Now, step by step, they dragged the unconscious man along the paracord line. The smoke pressed in like a living wall, stealing oxygen, stealing thought. Beth's vision blurred. Her lungs screamed, but she kept moving inch by inch. At last, daylight pierced the haze. Fresh air hit their faces as they stumbled out of the inferno, the technician limp but breathing. Medics rushed forward, lifting him onto a stretcher, calling vitals and oxygen masks. Beth collapsed to one knee, bracing herself on the ground, sucking in the sharp taste of morning air. Morales clapped her shoulder gently, eyes shining through soot. Pike stood silent, staring at Beth with something unfamiliar in his expression. Not mockery, not suspicion, respect. He looked at her brace, at the soot streaking her scarred neck, at the soldier who had carried more than her share. His phone, still tucked in his pocket, felt heavier than ever. The video he had taken of Steele's insults no longer matched the truth standing in front of him. Beth rose slowly, every muscle trembling, but her voice steady. One man saved. That's what discipline is for. And for the first time, Pike didn't argue. He simply nodded. By noon, the depot fire was out. The technicians survived thanks to Beth's steady hands and the quick teamwork she had commanded. Across the base, soldiers murmured about what they had witnessed, her scars, her courage, her refusal to quit when others froze. Respect hung in the air like a long-awaited truth. But in the age of phones and screens, stories don't stay pure for long. That afternoon, Pike's earlier recording slipped onto a private group chat. Steele's voice thundered from the clip. Coward, you can't even drag a dummy. How do you expect to drag a man? The camera angle caught Beth's fall, her face twisted in pain, but not the moments that followed. Not the scars, not the rescue, just her collapse and Steele's scorn. By evening, whispers swirled like wildfire through the barracks. Some soldiers nodded knowingly. She must have leaked it. Who else would humiliate a colonel like that? Others, less certain, shrugged. It's politics. She wanted revenge. The truth of her heroism was buried beneath rumors of betrayal. Beth heard the murmurs when she walked the halls. She saw the glances, some filled with doubt, others tinged with disappointment. She could have spoken up, pointed to the dozens who had witnessed the fire, the scars, the truth. But she stayed silent. At her desk that night, the stethoscope her mother left rested beside the folded letters she never sent. She traced the engraving with her thumb, E73, a reminder of compassion, a reminder of restraint. Her lips moved with a whisper no one else heard. This isn't about me. Because Beth understood. If she defended herself loudly, the story would shift from discipline to drama, from service to scandal. The unit's cohesion, the fragile thread of trust, would snap. and soldiers who needed order more than gossip would be left doubting their chain of command. So she bore the weight, quietly. She patched sprained ankles, checked vitals, walked past Snickers in the mess hall without lowering her gaze. She carried herself the way she always had, steady, disciplined, unshaken. Only Morales caught the weariness in her eyes, the slight drag in her steps when she thought no one was watching. The rumor mill did its work. By the weekend, some soldiers muttered that Beth had orchestrated everything from showing her scars to leaking Steele's humiliation. She wants the spotlight, one said. She's trying to climb rank by tearing someone else down, another added. The sting of their words cut deeper than the shrapnel ever had. But Beth swallowed it, choosing silence as her answer. In the quiet of her quarters, she wrote another letter she would never send. Dad, I know what they say about me, but I also know the truth, and truth doesn't always need an audience. Sometimes it only needs to endure. She folded the page, slid it into the box with the others, and sat back. It looked like she would pay dearly, her honor darkened by a rumor she hadn't started her courage, overshadowed by a video taken in malice, until a silent witness decided to step forward. It looked like she would pay dearly until a silent witness stepped forward. Morning assembly gathered under a heavy sky. Soldiers stood in formation, their chatter hushed, a tension running through the ranks. The rumors about Beth Carver still lingered, whispering like smoke that refused to clear. Colonel Steele loomed at the front, his authority dimmed but not yet extinguished. Doc Harlan stepped forward carrying a small black case under one arm. His voice, though aged, carried weight. Before this unit judges one of its own, the truth must be seen. From the case, he produced a compact medical camera. He placed it on the stand, the screen flickering to life. Grainy footage filled the display, time-stamped, marked from the infirmary's training records. The video showed Beth's profile during the fitness test. She never once reached for a phone. Her focus remained fixed on the events before her: pain, humiliation, determination, and then the rescue her commands, clear her actions, steady. Gas rippled through the formation. The evidence was undeniable. Harlan's voice sharpened. Captain Carver did not leak anything. The only person recording that morning was Sergeant Pike. All eyes turned. Pike shifted uncomfortably, guilt written across his face. He stepped forward, removing the phone from his pocket as if it weighed 100 pounds. It's true, I filmed it. I thought I was exposing Steele's cruelty, but I never meant for it to spread the way it did. And I sure as hell didn't think it would fall back on her. He looked directly at Beth. I'm sorry for doubting you, for using your pain as spectacle. Beth said nothing at first. She only inclined her head, a gesture of acceptance without triumph. Colonel Steele's face was carved in stone. For a long moment he remained silent. Then he spoke, his voice low, almost unrecognizable. You're right, Pike. The blame isn't yours alone. He looked at Beth, and for once there was no smirk, no sneer. Only the weight of something long buried. Years ago, my son, Cadet Jonathan Steele, died in a training accident. Regulations existed. Profiles were in place. But his commander ignored them, demanded he push through. They said no exceptions. And my boy never came home. The words hung heavy, settling over the formation like thunder. Steele's shoulders sagged. I swore it would never happen again. I thought if I crushed every excuse, if I demanded the same from all, I could prevent another father from bearing his child. But in my fear, I became the very kind of officer I despised. And in that fear, I caused harm. Beth's eyes softened, though her voice remained steady. The right discipline saves lives. The wrong discipline takes them. The two stood locked in silence, a quiet current flowing between them. Steele's facade cracked, revealing grief that had twisted into rigidity. For the first time, he looked not like a tyrant, but a man who had let his pain lead him astray. Morales stepped forward, breaking the silence. Sir, this unit doesn't need perfection. It needs leaders who know the difference between strength and stubbornness. Steele gave a small nod, the faintest trace of humility in his eyes. Then it will have them. Effective immediately, new protocols will be established. Medical briefings before every PT. Adaptive lanes for soldiers with permanent profiles. No one dismissed without understanding their scars and what they mean. A murmur of agreement swept through the formation. Soldiers straightened, the weight of respect settling around Beth. For once, Steele addressed her not as a subordinate to be mocked, but as a peer in sacrifice. Captain Carver, I can't erase the harm I've done, But I can ensure your courage shapes what comes next, if you'll allow it. Beth inhaled slowly, the paracord bracelet pressing against her skin. She nodded once, firm but not unkind. Then let's make sure no soldier ever carries scars alone again. The formation broke into applause, not raucous but steady measured, filled with the gravity of respect. Beth stood quietly, her scars hidden beneath her jacket once more, but their meaning now etched in every heart present. The sun broke through the clouds above Fort Iron Vale, casting long light over the soldiers. A new standard had been set, not by rank, not by fear, but by resilience and truth. The weeks after the fire at the fuel depot marked a quiet shift at Fort Iron Vale. What had once been a place of whispered doubts and sidelong glances toward Beth Carver had transformed into a post that carried her story like a banner. Soldiers walked taller, spoke with more measured tones, and when training began at dawn, there was no laughter at her expense, only respect. Beth, however, did not rest on vindication. She turned it into action. Inside a refurbished training hall, she began a course unlike anything the base had seen before. Its name was stenciled in bold letters on the wall: Adaptive Readiness Training. The class wasn't about raw numbers or punishing bodies until they broke. It was about learning how to serve longer, smarter, and with dignity intact. Beth faced the room, her voice calm but commanding. Around her sat recruits and seasoned soldiers alike, some skeptical, others eager. She lifted the old stethoscope her mother had left her, its engraving glinting faintly under the fluorescent lights. This is where I learned that every soldier is a story. You read that story before you make your judgment. Rule number 1, read before you rate. She paused, letting the words settle, then continued. Number 2, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. In combat, rushing costs lives. Precision saves them. Finally, she held up the paracord bracelet, its fibers worn from years, on her wrist. Rule number 3, hold the line, then lift the fallen. Never measure strength only by what you can carry. Measure it by who you help carry forward. The soldiers scribbled notes, but more importantly, they leaned in, not because of her scars, not because of her past humiliation, but because they recognized truth in her voice. Training sessions unfolded with drills that matched Beth's words. Modified lanes gave injured soldiers ways to participate without shame. Breathing techniques like 4-7-8 were taught alongside sandbag carries, reminding everyone that discipline was both physical and mental. No soldier was left behind or labeled weak for fighting a battle unseen. One morning, as the class wrapped up, Beth called forward a young private who had once snickered at her during the CFT. He looked nervous, shifting from one boot to another. Beth unclasped the bracelet from her wrist, the one woven by her mother's hands. She pressed it into his palm. Tomorrow it's your turn to hold the line. Don't forget what that means. The young man swallowed hard, eyes shining, and nodded with a seriousness that surprised even himself. Outside, the base bustled as usual, helicopters thundering in the distance, cadences echoing across the field. But inside that hall, something unshakable had been passed on. Not just training, not just discipline, a legacy. In both the military and in life, honor isn't counted in push-ups or medals. It's counted in how many times we choose to rise again, especially when it's not for ourselves but for those beside us. Beth Carver's scars became more than reminders of pain. They became proof that courage is not the absence of weakness, but the choice to stand again and again for others. The camera lingers on Beth as she steps out of the training hall into the golden evening light. Her silhouette is steady, her shoulders no longer bowed by doubt. The faint outline of her eagle tattoo shifts beneath her shirt as she walks toward the parade field. Behind her, voices of soldiers carry on the cadence she once struggled to keep up with. But now every voice sings with conviction, echoing her lessons. She does not need to look back. She knows the line is being held. If this story touched you, type respect in the comments. Share the story of your own quiet hero, a parent, a neighbor, a veteran, someone who lifted others when it mattered most. And if you believe these lessons still matter today, share this video so others may hear them too.